Welcome to our Explorers Club Women in Space panel. My name is Dr. Shawna Pandya, and we have a stellar lineup for you today. Pun absolutely intended. We have future astronauts, we have commercial space professionals, NASA engineers, disaster resilience turned space professionals, and so much more. So we are going to kick it off with an intro from each of us, including myself. So away we go. Next slide. As you've heard, my name is Dr. Shawna Pandya. Next slide. I wear a lot of different hats in the space industry, which I'm going to tell you about over the next 10 minutes. But before I was any of those things, next slide, I was a kid with a dream. And I was tremendously inspired by the night sky. Next slide. The amazing glittering arm of the Milky Way when I would go camping with my family. And I was inspired, wondering what else was out there. I was also a kid who grew up in the 90s, inspired by Canada's second ever astronaut selection. And my mind was blown by the fact that there were people who actually went out to space, and we called them astronauts. And this was the same time that Canada's first ever female physician, Dr. Roberta Bondar, next slide, flew to space. And this for me really set the trajectory for my professional career. I looked at Dr. Bondar and I thought, okay, well, she's Canadian, I'm Canadian, she's female, I'm female. So now all I need to do is go be a neuroscientist physician and boom, I can be an astronaut. And the craziest part about having dreams as a kid is that as an adult, you can surpass those dreams in ways you never thought possible. So today, next slide, I am a physician. I work in the ER. I also do women's health. But I also get to do a lot of cool things in the bioastronautics, operational, and citizen scientist field. So I'm going to take the next few slides to take you through what we do at the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. And Kelly and Yvette will also tell you as their crewmates of mine. Next slide, please. So we've been lucky enough to partner with amazing research partners, including the National Research Council, Final Frontier Design, the Canadian Space Agency. We've been lucky enough to test IVA, or intravehicular activity spacesuits in microgravity. So as you'll quickly catch on, there are a lot of acronyms in the space and exploration world, but we will take you through all of them. We have been lucky enough to use what you may have heard is called the Vomit Comet, that flight aircraft that flies in a parabola, gives us 20 to 30 seconds of 0G at a time to do science, test new technologies like new spacesuits. Next slide. I've been lucky enough to fly 6 parabolic flight campaigns, over 140 parabolas to date. Next slide. We've also conducted high altitude research campaigns in Northern Alberta to capture noctilucent clouds. Next slide. We've been lucky enough to test a different kind of spacesuit, extravehicular activity spacesuits with the Canadian Space Agency. Next slide. And we've also been in water operations. So this was from 2018 when we were doing emergency egress operations in the IVA suit. We're actually back here this week in Connecticut doing the same thing. Good to be back, first time all pandemic. Next slide. And then this week, so we've also conducted emergency night operations. Next slide. And we've also evolved to underwater operations, simulating, doing work in 0G on our simulated airlock, which has been incredible. I've literally actually just come out of the pool today. Next slide. And you can see some of our teammates there doing some underwater work. Next slide. My work, my interest in space and austere environments has also taken me to some really incredible locales. So I was lucky enough to get my aquanaut designation as part of the 2019 NEPTUNE mission. So there's another acronym, Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. Next slide. That was very special because that was my first flagged mission of the Explorers Club. There's myself and 4 other crewmates, also all members. And we did science, technology demonstrations, and also grew as a crew over those 5 days at the Jules Undersea Lodge in the Florida Keys. And my adventures have also taken me 13 miles down from the Jules Undersea Lodge to, next slide, the Aquarius Reef Base. Some of you may know this, whereas NEMO, where NASA conducts its NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations. This is where I did my dive and medical hyperbaric training. Next slide. And I've also been to analog astronaut environments. So this is the Mars Desert Research Station, real life on fake Mars, looks like Tatooine, but essentially we live and work as a crew. We bring our own science and operations with us. And we also have to suit up if we're going outside, next slide, on exploratory activities, lest the Martian environment try to kill us. Next slide. I've been lucky enough to bring my passion for space medicine to an operational space medicine course, teaching my students to essentially become a medical space MacGyver, using what resources they have at their disposal to be able to deal with medical emergencies as they come up in resource-limited environments. Next slide. And I've picked up a few skills along the way, including rescue, nitrox, scientific diver, next slide, as well as piloting, next slide, as well as skydiving, next slide. And the other hat that I wear that I'll tell you about is in technology development. So I also work with a virtual reality company called Luxsonic. We've been lucky to bring VR for medical procedures to some incredible austere environments. Next slide. So we actually brought our virtual reality radiology room underwater with us on the Neptune mission. And that very same week, we also flew at 0G, as you can see on the next slide. We've also developed a medical procedural VR suite for the Canadian Space Agency. So next slide, if something goes wrong on EVA, how do you practice those skills in VR? So that's been really cool. And on my other technology hat is with Orbital Assembly Corporation. This is the world's first commercial artificial gravity rotating space station. So I get to work on the medical aspects of this company. Next slide. I also get to contribute to research. Here's a recent literature review that we conducted or that we published on medical guidelines for commercial suborbital spaceflight. I've written a few book chapters related to long duration spaceflight on the next slide. And next slide. I also have been, next slide, yeah, thanks. I've also been lucky enough to take on several mentorship roles. So you may hear about a little bit more about this from Erica. I'm working on with a company called Chad Canada to develop a suborbital payload for a Blue Origin flight at a future date. I'm a mentor for women in aerospace medicine as well. And next slide, I get to share my story with audiences such as yourselves, sharing my passion for space. Next slide. And all of this really came full circle when this childhood dream I had of being like Dr. Bondar was encapsulated, next slide, alongside Dr. Bondar as one of 3 Canadian women doing amazing things in space alongside my childhood idol. So in the last couple of minutes here, before I turn it over to the amazing women, this is just a snapshot of what I'm involved in. Let's talk about the why. Next slide. So why do all this? So the things that drive me are pushing human spaceflight further, making a mark on space medicine as we go further and to more distant and to more resource locales like the moon, Mars, and beyond. I'm passionate about democratizing access to space. That's why I'm so involved with IIAS and the citizen science. And then I'm passionate about lifting others up along the way. And that's why I firmly believe in mentorship. So those are the things that drive me. And I just take it one step at a time. That is my role in space. And I am so excited to call my teammate, Kelly Girardi. In fact, if you go to the next slide, she took my that photo in 0G when we flew together in 2018. And Kelly, to get us started, I'm just going to read your introduction. You are fantastic. You're incredible. In addition to being my crewmate in IIAS, you're a future commercial astronaut with Virgin Galactic. You are a gifted science communicator. You have just published Luna Muna, a book for children. You're a best-selling author on Amazon with It's Not Rocket Science. You're an analog astronaut, but I don't want to take away your entire life story. So I would love to know in your opening statement, what drove you to where you are today? How did, what's your next goal? And, tell us your journey. So Kelly, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Shauna. Thanks for the amazing introduction, and to everyone listening. It's just incredible because I have obviously worked so closely with Shauna, but just watching, the slides laid out of all of her accomplishments every time, it just gets me. It's like incredible. All of the women on this panel are extraordinary. So it's going to be a fun conversation. But yeah, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I've spent the last 10 years in the commercial spaceflight industry, working alongside, including all of these incredible women and so many people. And I've held a bunch of different roles, from policy to media to business development, operations. It's been a wild ride. And part of my passion for joining the industry in the first place was to help open up access to space. So I spent years with the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, which was contributing to the creation of everything from the regulatory framework and the launch licensing process, all the fun in the weeds stuff on what it takes to open up a new frontier and to push the envelope of civilian spaceflight, non-government spaceflight. And so the pinnacle, I would say, of my space career journey thus far is that I am going to be flying as a payload specialist and a professional commercial astronaut on an upcoming research spaceflight with Virgin Galactic. I'm going to be conducting healthcare and fluid experiments representing IIAS, which is the research institute Shauna just told you all about. So it's really exciting. And I would say, just piggybacking off of all of the multitudes that Shauna just shared with us that she holds, I operate very similarly. Space is a big part of my life, but I wear a lot of other hats too. Outside of space, I'm a mission ops lead at Palantir Technologies. I serve on the Defense Council for the Truman National Security Project, and I'm very humbled to serve on the board of directors for the Explorers Club, whose flag I had the honor to carry at the Mars Desert Research Station during my own analog mission a few years ago. And Shauna mentioned, I'm also a science communicator. I have a children's book coming out. The character Luna Muna looks very suspiciously similar to my 3-year-old daughter, Delta V. And so she takes up a big part of my life as well. But yeah, I think, the thing to hit on the question, Shauna, that you so kindly teed me up for, it's like, maybe I'll just share something that everyone has asked me since the news came out that I was going to, have this incredible opportunity to fly to space, to become an astronaut. It's like the dream, right? Well, at least mine. And I think, a lot of people expected to hear from me something like, I never could have imagined this, right? And the reality is like, that just wouldn't be true at all, because I have dreamed of that exact moment, like in detail for the last decade. Not only dreamed of it in detail, but worked alongside people who were making it a reality in real time. And so it was really more of a moment of, we're here, not just I'm getting to do this, but we as an industry are here at this moment where people like me who are have been worker bees in this industry are able to actually benefit from the fact that space is being opened up. We're able to use it as a laboratory to benefit humanity. And so it's really, it was really moving from that perspective. And it tied back to sort of, your question, what drives me. That's why I embarked on a career in this industry in the first place, to help champion, that mission, visionary companies like Virgin Galactic, like Blue Origin. And so that moment has always been in the back of my head. But I will say it was more exciting than I could have prepared for. Obviously, there was a lot of excitement to it. And I think the last thing I'll say before I hand it back and everyone can meet everyone else on the call, it's like, to me, the most exciting part of this is that we are standing on the doorstep to a new era of space exploration, and companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, SpaceX, they're leading the way, not just by enabling a new generation of scientist-astronauts like myself to conduct research in space, but just creating access and opportunity for civilians of all disciplines. I hope all of us saw the incredible Blue Origin flight yesterday and William Shatner and the amazing Blue astronauts and the poetry, right, that came out of their reflections of what it was like to be in space. It's like, I want to see civilians of all disciplines experiencing spaceflight. I want the poets, the athletes, the musicians, because for the first few hundred humans who had the opportunity to journey to space, we had to optimize solely on function for their flights. Now we also have the opportunity to, in parallel, optimize on experience as well. And so that's a new wave of space travelers who won't all be engineers. And I think that's entirely the point. So to me, the space age is a broader cultural movement, and our next giant leap will require the talents of artists, engineers, and everyone in between. And so I'm just always so humbled to be a part of that and to get to work alongside so many people like everyone on this call who have, really dedicated themselves and their careers and their time to making this a reality and to propelling us into that future. So thank you so much, Shauna.
That was amazing. And, judging by the expressions on your co-panelists' faces, I think we're all just as excited. And I really hope later this hour we can get into your vision for accessibility, because I've been inspired for that. So let's talk about that a little bit later. Now I want to call to the stage none other than Dr. Tess Caswell, and she is an engineer, scientist, analog astronaut. She is a PhD in geology, started off in Alaska, currently works at NASA JSC, a whole series of skill sets and adventures along the way, including a 30-day stay in the NASA Human Exploration Research Analog, or HERA 11 crew. I'm so excited to hear about how you got to where you are. Dr. Tess Caswell, please take it away.
Thank you, Shauna. Man, I don't know how I follow such incredible people on this panel. It's just a real honor to be here. And I'd like to kind of continue a theme with my slides here that I've titled Dreams, Goals, and Plans, with an asterisk by the plans, because realistically, this whole story is how I've ended up in my dream job through a series of plot twists. So I think, like both of you before me, we were inspired as kids and we had a plan. Little Tess on the left here was inspired by a teacher and wanted to end up like grown-up Tess on the right and maybe someday fly to space. Had a very concrete plan at that time in her life that really did not pan out, but has actually, things have come full circle and ended up pretty awesome. And I'd like to share that journey with you. But first, a little bit about what I do currently. I'm a member of the EVA, or Extravehicular Activities Operations team at NASA Johnson Space Center, which means that I help plan spacewalks and then I help teach astronauts how to do them. And humans have been doing spacewalks for almost 60 years now, starting with Alexei Leonov's first spacewalk in 1965, which at the time was just for the purposes of even just seeing if we could do spacewalks in the first place. We started learning lessons right away. We advanced very quickly to doing spacewalks for exploration. So many of you may recognize this picture of Buzz Aldrin in the middle, standing on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission, and sort of an iconic photo of a human standing on another world for the purposes of exploration. More recently, we've moved into using spacewalks for maintenance and repairs and sustaining our spacecraft that are orbiting the Earth. So we've done, for example, over 200 spacewalks to build and maintain and upgrade the International Space Station, which is where my current job security comes from. However, all of these spacewalks take training for our crew members. They don't just launch to space and then go out the door and do the awesome work that they do. And we have a variety of environments that we use in order to teach them the skills that they need to be safe and successful on a spacewalk. One of the most well-known is probably the Neutral Buoyancy Lab here in Houston, which is a 6 million gallon swimming pool in which we can put crew members into a water-rated version of the spacesuit and really give them the best picture possible, as Shauna already mentioned, of what it's like to work in a neutrally buoyant or zero-G environment. Here at JSC, we have a team of support divers who help things like hold tools that want to sink, because we are still subject to the law of gravity. But it is really the best training environment that we have for the environment of space. We also use virtual reality for things like how masses handle in zero-G. And we use gravity offload systems like in this bottom right picture, where we put the crews in a hang gliding harness and really get them used to what it's like to working in an environment where there's no water drag, there's no friction to slow you down. So when you turn that wrench, your whole body's going to try to go the opposite direction. And we have to get them used to that before they go out into space and are trying to do maintenance in the zero-G vacuum environment. Now, some of you have already kind of alluded to the fact that we're going beyond the Earth at this point, right? The space age is really building up steam again, and we're heading off to the moon in the near future. And that means that we need new spacesuits, and we have to relearn how to be field geologists on the moon again. We got up to a really great cadence on Apollo 17 when we had the only geologist to have walked on the moon, Jack Schmitt, but we're about to send more geologists back, and we want them to be as effective and safe as possible while they're on the lunar surface as we can make them. So we're teaching them about new suits that are designed for working on the moon, and we're developing new techniques, new processes that will help them perform geology in the really extreme environment of the lunar South Pole, where the sun's going to be very low in the sky. It's going to feel like night almost all the time. How do you even identify a rock when the sun is at a 10-degree angle above the horizon and everything is covered in shadow? So these are the skills and processes that we're trying to put together now as part of the EVA group at JSC to prepare our crews for the upcoming lunar missions as part of the Artemis program. So how did I get to this job? Kind of like Shauna, I was inspired as a kid. This is, again, baby Tess, 12 years old, the day that she came back from her first trip to space camp. Yes, there were more than one. And around this time, I was inspired by a teacher who had a picture like this one that covered a huge portion of our classroom. And I was just captivated by not only the journey into space, but the machines that get us there, and the things that we learn, the things that we develop in order to launch human beings into such an extreme and dangerous environment to do things for the betterment of all humanity and bring them back to Earth. And at around the same time, an astronaut came to my hometown of Soldotna, Alaska. Pete Conrad, the third man to walk on the moon, was visiting it as a fundraiser that my parents kind of weaseled me into to give a speech about how space camps were awesome and we should have more Challenger learning centers around the world. So I got to meet Pete, and he told me that if I wanted to be an astronaut, I should go to a military academy, become a pilot and an engineer, and then I could become an astronaut and go to space. Well, as a 12-year-old, that seemed like a great plan. And I mapped it all out. So my dream of becoming an astronaut had the goals of becoming a pilot and an engineer, with the plan of going to the Air Force Academy, going to NASA, and then going directly to space. So when I mapped it out, this is what it looked like at 12 years old. Straight line to JSC, brief pause until I got assigned to a mission, Kennedy Space Center, space. That's how it was totally gonna go. However, first plot twist, I very quickly realized that the Air Force Academy was not the right place for me. And I voluntarily separated after 1 month and returned to Alaska. That's a long story. If you want to hear it, find me at the next conference, buy me a beverage, we'll talk about it. It has nothing to do with the Air Force Academy, no aspersions on the Air Force Academy. It was not the right place for me. So I left. My plan was in shambles. I had no plan at this point because that's what I'd planned on doing my whole life. I had to replan, ended up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, figuring I would go to a better school after a year. But I discovered that the University of Alaska is the only university in the world that owns its own sounding rocket launch facility at Poker Flat Research Range. So I became part of a team of students who built a sounding rocket payload that launched in my senior year to 100 kilometers in altitude that was all built by students. We were in the lab from day one. It was entirely our creation, launched above the Kármán line into the D region of the ionosphere, came back, made a very big crater because it didn't have a parachute. But I was getting hands-on real-world engineering experience right away. I realized very quickly that other people's ideas of what I should do with my life maybe weren't the best. Maybe I should listen to my intuition and stick with a place where I could start getting experiences like this from square one. We also had the opportunity to become the first Alaskan students to fly with NASA's reduced gravity program. So like Shauna, I flew aboard the reduced gravity aircraft. And at this point, I've had 5 flights as well, doing science in 0G. But at this time, it was the first Alaskan students to get to do that. So that was a real thrill. Then it seemed like I was getting back on the plan. I accepted a job in mission control for the International Space Station. And I was sitting in this room for 3 years, monitoring the leg support and thermal systems that keep astronauts alive and comfortable aboard the International Space Station. I was pushing buttons, I was sending commands, I was controlling the ISS. It really seemed like I was back on that plan. I've achieved the goal of working at NASA, contributing to human spaceflight. But plot twist, my significant other at the time matched to a surgical residency in New York City. So then the constraints around my plan changed. Now I needed to come up with a new plan that kept me close to the person who I've now been happily married to for 8 years, while staying within the space realm. So I went back to school. I studied icy moons and planetary geology. I used this machine to torture ice in a variety of different ways to understand how geology works in the context of a world that is entirely covered in ice. If you think of the bedrock and then think of it as all ice, how does geology even work at that point? So I did a ton of experiments with that machine there that I designed and built using my engineering degree to get a geology degree. That was around the same time that I joined the Human Exploration Research Analog, or HERA, Mission 11 crew with these fine gentlemen with whom I spent 30 days in an analog habitat, learning what it was like to be an astronaut on an extended duration mission and to perform research studies as part of a NASA space physiology study. And shout out to our friend Kyle, who I think is appearing in multiple slides with multiple people on this panel. He was a great resource during that mission, and it was great to have a really supportive crew. Even as the only woman on the crew, which I was worried about going in, these guys were incredibly understanding. They were very open-minded. They were willing to talk about everything, and we ended up having a phenomenal time while doing good science for NASA to help push the boundaries of human space exploration. Around this time, I met this phenomenal person named Dr. Erica Wagner and some other people who worked at this really cool company called Blue Origin. And I decided that I wanted to try my hand in the commercial space business. So I applied to Erica's team. I flew out to Seattle and I interviewed for Erica's team. And while I was there, a former coworker of mine, who is now the manager of the New Shepard operations team, said, "Hey, you've got spaceflight ops experience. You should interview for my team as well." I ended up going to that team and helping design the products that actually launched the New Shepard crewed vehicle. So I helped design the plans and the procedures that took New Shepard from being a development rocket for test flights to a safe and repeatedly operational vehicle that was able to launch one of my idols, Wally Funk, into space. So I feel very honored to have had a part in what we saw yesterday and what we saw back in July when Wally and her crew got to fly as well. But in the process of working at Blue, I realized that I was really more passionate about going beyond Earth. I wanted to be part of the people who were going back to the moon. So back to Houston, I went to combine my ops knowledge from NASA and Blue Origin with my geology knowledge from my PhD to helping design the processes and procedures for going back to the moon. And with that, I think I'm running out of time because it is impossible to go through this many slides in 10 minutes, but I hope I've given you a picture of what the journey was like for me, and I'm really looking forward to the remainder of the conversation with the incredible ladies on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that incredible introduction to your journey, Tess. All I have to say is I hope I'm as cool as you if I ever grow up. You have an incredible life path, and we'll get to exploring that further. Just before we get to our next speaker, I see that there's folks checking in from Porto in Portugal, Brazil, LA, North Virginia, Queens, Texas, New Zealand, Oregon, Alabama, NYC, DC. I know there's someone from Australia. So welcome all of you. Keep those questions coming. I see them and we will get to them shortly. Now I want to turn it over to a close friend, teammate, a lady with an incredible background, Ms. Yvette Gonzalez. She is multi-talented. She is a polymath. She is humanitarian, bioastronautics researcher, spacesuit technician, human resilience expert, over 2 decades of emergency response experience, rebuilding communities in the most extreme conflict, war, natural disaster, and epidemiological zones. You will find Yvette there. She currently focuses on space technologies for solving Earth challenges. She and I have had the pleasure of flying zero-G and running multiple operational campaigns in the field. So without further ado, Yvette, take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for having me. And what an honor to be with all of you, Tess, Erica, and Kelly. It's true that I know some of you, but it is so wonderful to get to know everyone today. I often think about when someone asks me for either a job interview or for at a networking event, tell me a little bit about yourself. I think we don't think about the context in which you're nurtured, and seeing those photos of the young Shauna and the young Tess, and I've seen photos of Kelly, knowing that, oh yeah, something created this environment around us and something really built our grit and our willingness to be in this industry. And what was that? And how do we interact with each other? And so I mostly grew up in El Paso, Texas. And growing up there for at least my teenage years, I didn't know, and I wasn't really aware of all those compounding factors, like what it was to grow up near a military base and what it meant when all the troops came from Korea, and I had best friends from Korea, that we were speaking multiple languages at all times because it was just endemically the way it was. It was a poverty context, but I didn't know any better because I had never been in any other context. And so that being resourceful in a low resource setting was something that was just innate. And thank goodness, because it built a lot of what my resilience is really founded on. It was also a gang culture, meaning that in and around us, we were just completely used to the gang violence and the gang culture that was growing around us. And again, that was just another seemingly for us normal because we were experiencing it. But growing up in junior high and high school, knowing that that was impacting the way that we saw each other, the way that we interacted with each other, and the behavior of our institutes was really important. I also grew up believing White Sands was where we went to have fun every few months. And I didn't understand fully, being so young, what the historic value of White Sands was and what they were doing there and what the missile range was for and all of the work that NASA was doing. And that some of my family members that were commuting every morning for 45 minutes or more to White Sands were actually working as NASA contractors. And it was just normal. It was just something that we had in our environment. I am second generation in the US. My family is of Mexican and Native American heritage. And so we have this around us as well. And it was also a home to really rich geology. So our university that I'm so proud of, I didn't go there, but most of my family did. We're really proud of UTEP because now in the program that I am with Shauna and with Kelly and with Kyle, because he's part of all of our slides, is that we have a university that prides itself in now in a partnership agreement with Space Force. And the president is on the board of directors for Blue Origin. And so there's this rich culture that is just teeming around all of the youth growing up in this border culture. And now Spaceport America is in our backyard. So I dreamt of space and all of that context was there. But I didn't want to go into the military. And quite like Tess, somebody told me once, oh, you have to be a fighter pilot. And I'm like, well, that's not my interest. I want to do something different. And, having exposure to multinational cultures, I wanted to travel and I wanted to do something bigger. And I wanted to explore. It was just inside me, that real deep feeling to connect. And when I got to college, there was a sign in the cafeteria one day, and it said, do you want to travel the world, learn new languages, and save lives? And I thought, that's all my, my bucket list. And so I started my journey as a humanitarian. And at the time, I was really focused on public health. I got my master's in public health, and I pursued what I really believed was going to be something completely impactful around my world. And it ended up in over 49 countries, over 22 years, being able to share my skill set of coming from communities that were underrepresented and marginalized, understanding and having empathy for that experience, and then being able to revitalize and rebuild in these contexts, because I could really identify with what is it like to be resource poor? What is it like to have to connect with a community and depend on a community in order to thrive? And then ultimately, what am I learning so that I can help give back? And is my presence giving back? There was a huge range of existential questions I asked in my experience. And here you see I'm in Uganda under a tree with youth having a focus group. And in those moments, and in this moment you see here on the side in Haiti, I really started to ask myself, is this enough? Is this really the maximum impact of my human experience? And is my lived experience truly giving back in the way that I feel is meaningful? And when I was in Haiti, a friend of mine was 3D printing for a healthcare center. And she left Haiti, and I'm like, what's she up to? And I saw these space photos. Well, turned out she was at Made in Space, and she worked on the first 3D printer that went to the ISS. And so she invited me to come visit her in San Francisco. And she introduced me to what really was a pivotal moment in my life. And that was, oh, I can actually find deeper meaning in my skills, deeper meaning in my lived experience, if I transfer a lot of what I'm doing and adapt it to the space industry. And by the way, 2018, January, that's when I started. It was a moment where she really convinced me, and so did all my other friends. Oh, didn't you know that this is the time that space is happening, and that there is room for somebody who isn't in the military who isn't purely an engineer, and I didn't know that. And as you see in this photo, this is me and my sister. And I thought, oh my gosh, my childhood dream can come true. And the first thing she said was, you should join this group, the IIAS. And it's kind of like a training ground. You'll get some idea of what, space exploration is like, and some real training. Well, what I didn't know was it was going to be this list. And I didn't know what I was getting into. And when I started, that's when I met Kelly. We were in the intro class together. And I thought, this is just blowing my mind that I can be part of these courses, and I'm not an engineer and I'm not a pilot. And then if I didn't understand something, it was completely accessible to me. And if I didn't know how to do something, I was able to learn that. And it was kind of the safest ground, I would say, an environment and team to really have a soft entry into the industry. And by that, I mean, as I'm going through all of these hypoxia tests and pressurized spacesuit environment for the first time, and learning about the science and technology that we're working with and the research that we're going to be conducting, I was never ashamed for any questions. I was never meant to feel like I didn't belong. In fact, it was quite the opposite, a very organic team coming together. And at every turn was somebody that wanted to help, willing to be a partner in crime. And like I like to say, not just allies, but accomplices. Like, they put their skin in the game to get things done for you and make sure you have opportunities. And so I found this was the first relatable group into space and the most perfect team I could have been part of to do that crossover. So while we were doing these trainings, you see this is actually where Shauna is today. This is our NBL. We do our survival training here as well. And as we're going through this, to top this experience off and to have these experiences of all the various aspects of what it would take to be an astronaut and have that experience, for what are the human factors involved, what is our human performance, both qualitative and quantitative. What else could that mean for me, and where can I find my place in that? Well, I was very fortunate to be trained with the IIAS in a Final Frontier design course that certified me as a spacesuit technician. Now, I'm not an engineer and I don't build spacesuits, but certainly I have been the spacesuit technician for Kelly, for Shauna in our microgravity campaigns, in our field campaigns. And to that end, I'm really able to ascertain donning, safety, doffing, pressurized environment, ensuring monitoring of all their vitals. And that's a very exciting way that I can contribute. And it's also very important because it's helping technologies advance. So half the time we're having a blast, right? And it's just so much fun to be doing these things. And then it's extremely focused, and it's really important to be focused with each other. And then we're learning teamwork. You see these teams up here. It's not like Beyond Borders, where Angelina Jolie and the same team show up every country and every setting, and it's like, oh, this is my team. No, quite the opposite. Both in humanitarian and in space, you don't always have the same crew. You're lucky when you get the same ones, but you have to be ready to adapt, and you have to be ready to understand. And this is really been one of the exciting things for me, is that I never know what my crew is going to be made up of, and I have to quickly adapt and ascertain where they're coming from to understand how they're operating in the environment with me. So you see here, this is also actually quite great. I have a photo here that's Kelly, Shauna, and myself in microgravity. And you can see our crews are really closely connected to the National Research Council. And this is one of our flights, probably a little choppy, but I'm trying to show. In any given flight, we have about 5 to 22 experiments. And here you probably see Kelly's in the suit. She's doing a biomonitor. She has a fluid cell. Our other two colleagues have fluid cells and biomonitor plaques in front of them. I have a rotating body. And then on the bottom, there's food experiments. So we have a really nice range of science that we're conducting together. And we take all that from there into the field. And Tess was talking about how the planetary geology is really important now and it's coming full circle. Well, absolutely. We actually get to have an instructor who instructs the NASA astronaut candidates. He takes us to the Apollo training site, and doesn't even matter if you're an engineer or not, right? You come from any background, and we go through a course where we design what we believe would be a more effective tool, efficient tool for planetary exploration. And then we get to build those. We build them as teams, or we 3D print them. And we spend our time out on this volcanic field together, using them, testing them, and evaluating them. And then we have our own laboratory. It's called a Gravity Offset Laboratory in Canada at the Canadian Space Agency, which is one of our partners. And we get to take those tools and we test them again in the lunar yard in microgravity. So you see up there, that's probably Shauna actually, and working in mock-up ISS. Then me, I'm there in like Martian gravity perhaps. And then we take the team and we each share our tools to test them with the gloves, without the gloves, on the lunar ground, without it. So we really get this large range of exposure to what is it like to be in any of a really nice climate, atmospheric, geoscience, bioastronautics. What does that whole spectrum of science mean? Well, it means many things. And one thing it means is you don't only have to be an astronaut. You don't only have to be an engineer. You can be very passionate about the one thing that you think you're good at, or the many things, because multitudes keeps coming up, and it's exactly what it is that you can be multidimensional and you can be unapologetic about it. And it can be to your benefit to be relevant in that way. I really hope that this crossover, and my aim is that there's a paradigm shift for both humanitarian work and for space. And that paradigm is that there is a climate crisis. I care deeply about what my ancestors built for me and what I leave for 7 generations ahead of me. I care deeply about how I interact with the world. And is it okay? And is it right? So I hope that the work that I do here, I can translate to technologies that help. Space is still a privilege, and I hope that we make this accessible. That's exactly what we've talked about. So how do we find a solution to that? I want to be part of that solution. I want to open that door wide open, but I want it to be a really genuine one and have impact. And then also there's been limited experiential training rounds, and we hope that we can open that up, and I do, to many more countries and to more marginalized communities, so they know they don't have to be intimidated by needing to move to the US or needing to be in Europe or having to have that engineering degree and coming from no money, that they can say, oh, I can actually experience something in a different setting, get those skill sets, and I can contribute. So I'd hope that all of that would be kind of full circle meaningful. So I thank you for your time. I'm excited to be here. And of course, I'm happy that we're going to have a conversation about everything.
Thank you so much, Yvette, for capturing your story, your journey, our experiences together so beautifully. There's so many beautiful comments and questions coming in from the chat. I see them. I promise you we will get to you. Thank you. Just to share some of them with the fellow panelists, getting lots of admiration for the paths you've taken, the incredible experiences, the work you're doing. So we do see that. Now, without further ado, I would like to call to the stage Dr. Erica Wagner. So Erica is the Payload Sales Director for Blue Origin. That is the one and only who launched William Shatner to space, oldest astronaut now, just yesterday. Massive congratulations on that. Erica's background is just as impressive as our fellow panelists. She has Blue Origin. She works to improve access to space, science, technology, arts, and education. So you're seeing a theme here amongst all of the panelists. She has previously worked with the X Prize Foundation as the Senior Director of Exploration Prize Development, founding executive director of the X Prize Lab at MIT. Extremely interdisciplinary background, including degrees in biomedical and aerospace engineering, because one isn't enough, with research spanning everything from human and mammalian adaptation to microgravity, partial gravity, centrifugation, as well as organizational innovation and prize theory. Erica, it seems like you couldn't just pick one. Your path is fascinating. I can't wait to hear more. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Shauna. I think we're back to the multitudes again. So This was going to be a very similar talk to many of the ones that we've heard today, starting with my childhood inspiration. And this is the first book I remember ever owning that taught me about space and sparked my curiosity. And then about 36 hours ago, some other things happened. I figured I might sort of change up the talk a little bit. So I hope y'all will sort of indulge me. So 36 hours ago, this is me in Western Texas, about 2 hours east of where Yvette grew up in El Paso. And right up there, up in the sky above me and my good friend Joseph, is New Shepard 18. So that is our rocket that was traveling up to the Kármán line and back just a day ago. And on board that vehicle were the 4 newest humans to ever go to space. We are just underneath the 600 people going to space mark in the whole history of humanity. So to be able to share this experience with the 4 of them was really quite incredible. I think most of you have probably gotten to know William Shatner and Captain Kirk over the years, but maybe not so much getting to know Chris and Glenn and Audrey. I hope you get a chance to hear their stories because they're all incredible in their own right. And I think what's really interesting here is that they are starting to open up that door, and they believe very deeply in a future where more of us are traveling to space. And I thought I might just spend a few minutes sort of talking about the why and the why this matters to me. I think we've heard some awesome stories from my colleagues here on the panel. But at Blue Origin, we talk about a future of millions of people living and working in space, right? Moving from these first outposts that we've had on Skylab and Mir and the International Space Station to thinking about things that look more like scientific bases like we have in Antarctica and some of the analog stations that we've been seeing today, to maybe someday in the future something that looks more like a city in orbit. Or maybe, since we're here at the Explorers Club, something that's a little bit more of an ecosystem in orbit. And I look at these visions and I think about how we get there and why it matters. And there's a lot of different answers to that. But for me, it really comes down to the things that we can stand to gain to learn about space, about ourselves, and about our world. So we've heard a lot about the parabolic aircraft flights that have been the springboard for so many of our careers. Here was mine. I had a chance when I was teaching at MIT to take 23 of my students up to go explore fluid physics and hardware development for biology experiments and the ways that we might propel small spacecraft around the cosmos. And what I was finding in these moments was that it really is about space as a tool. And the way that we can explore this little switch that we call gravity and sort of thinking about when we have the effects of gravity that we feel fully and we're weightful versus when we have the effects of gravity counteracted and we feel weightless. And so it's really interesting to think about why that even matters. So I have a few videos to share here from NASA. The one on the left from Don Pettit's Saturday Morning Science series. If you've never seen them, they're fantastic. This is sort of Don at his playful best, exploring science in all of its forms. And so here what he did was just dropped an Alka-Seltzer tablet in a little bubble of water. And what you see is that we don't get the same effects that we do on the ground. Bubbles don't rise and liquids don't sink. And we get these very surface tension driven effects. And on the right, what you see is filling a mock cup that he made out of the binder cover on the space station. And really interesting to see what happens with fluids in this. They tend to go towards these critical wetting angles, this sort of teardrop shape. They're going to gather down in that corner. And that's neat and fun to watch and pretty cool to think about how you would drink out of a cup in 0G. But what it ends up driving here on the ground is a better understanding of all the things that fluids do. It allows us to design better printers, microfluidics, better diagnostics for the medical industry. And we really start to have a more fundamental understanding of what's going on with these systems. Flames are another one that I find totally fascinating. Combustion research has been going on for decades in the space world. On the left, you see a flame on Earth, that sort of traditional birthday candle. And what's going on there is the combustion's happening at the base, and it's all those hot byproducts are rising because hot things rise, right? They're less dense. Well, when you're in microgravity, density doesn't really matter the same way. So you get these little cool spherical flames, and we can use those to study, again, the fundamentals of how this stuff works. You can take that G and drive it all the way down to zero in all those equations that you're looking at. And it allows us to design more effective engines, to better understand how flames propagate, to understand fire safety. I had to throw this one in. Our friend Richard Garriott, chairman of the Explorers Club, when he had a chance to take his space flight, he took up some experiments with the Challenger centers that Tess was talking about earlier. And here he's showing basically two densities of liquid. You can think about this as taking salad dressing and shaking it up. But instead of getting sort of water and oil that separate into layers, you get this distribution. Why does that matter? Well, here's a very similar thing happening in fiber optic cables. So when you take glass and you take a glass preform and you stretch it out to make a fiber optic cable, some of these cables that are really high efficiency, they're called Z-bland fibers, have pieces in materials in the glass that are more dense, and they tend to crystallize out and make these little bubbles and structures within the glass. When you do that in microgravity, you can actually get this incredible distribution where you're getting this very clean microgravity. Nothing falls out of solution. It all sort of stays there. And you can make fiber optic cables that are orders of magnitude better than what we can get here on the ground. And that feeds into making things like medical lasers and aircraft sensing technologies and higher bandwidth communications. My own research in graduate school was around bioastronautics, medical health, and here's some work that's been done in bone health. On the top, you see a bone that's been normally loaded. We tend to sort of build bone in the structures that follow the loads that we're living under. And on the bottom, you see a bone that's been in microgravity and unloaded. And you see that those fine spindles are breaking apart and thinning out. And it's essentially a very aggressive form of osteoporosis. We find that astronauts on board a space station are losing bone at a rate that's about 10 times faster than an 80-year-old woman with osteoporosis here on the ground. So it gives us this model for really understanding the fundamentals of the disease and for exploring how we might use new pharmacology to treat it, and the role of exercise and staying healthy. So just another one of those things that we keep learning. Every time we reach out into space, we learn more about ourselves and impacts here on the ground. And I want to echo what we've been hearing throughout the day. It's really not just about science and technology and engineering. It's also about all that other stuff that makes us human. This is a project that I was so excited to get to fly on our last payload flight on New Shepard. This is Amwako Boafo. He is an artist out of Ghana. He is really quite an astounding portrait artist and has been selling art in the fine arts world for a number of years now. And he took the opportunity to paint 3 of our parachute hatch covers, a self-portrait and a portrait of his mother and a portrait of his good friend's mother, so that they could join us on the journey to space, and that we could start to explore what it means to explore what it means to explore, and what it means to be included in these adventures and in these explorations. So I thought I might close with a picture from William Shatner. Again, yesterday morning, just over the western part of Texas, looking out over the world. And when he came back, he said, "What I'd love to do is to communicate as much as possible the jeopardy, the moment you see the vulnerability of everything. It's so small. This air which is keeping us alive is thinner than your skin. It's a sliver. It's immeasurably small when you think in terms of the universe." And so even when we're talking about tourism and adventure instead of the sort of classic Explorers Club exploration that involves science and discovery, we are discovering things, and we are, I think, making awareness throughout the world of this incredible planet that we live on, and coming to know ourselves that much better. My kids have been a big part of my journey. This is them when they were a bit younger than they are now. But I think that what they are finding is that they have grown up in a world where all of this is possible. And you know, like those of us who got a chance to see Space Camp and meet people that were dreaming about these things when we were young, my kids have had the experience of growing up with this around them. And I love one of my favorite stories when William, my little guy, was in preschool. He came home from school one day and he told my husband, who works at Boeing and works on aircraft, he said, "Daddy, when I grow up, I'm going to make airplanes. But Sally, I think she's going to make spaceships because boys make airplanes and girls make spaceships." And I just love that this is what their experience is and what they see as the possibilities of the future, and they see themselves in it. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our panelists.
That was a beautiful note to end on, both the chills I got when hearing William Shatner's words, and then just the inspiration. You know, if we're going to have gender stereotypes, I am totally okay with thinking that spaceships are for girls, and I'd happily reinforce that. We have a chat that is teeming with questions from an incredibly active and interested audience. We're going to get to them soon. In fact, there's a related one off after this first question I'm going to ask you all, but I do want to address that we're just coming fresh off World Space Week, October 4th through 11th, and that's particularly relevant to this year and to today's panel because this year's theme was Women in Space. And so the question for the panel is, why is it so important to highlight the role of women in space? What have we achieved so far? You know, have we come far enough? What should we be tackling next? And when it comes to representing women, representing underrepresented groups in space, you know, what is our next milestone? So Erica, you kind of ended on that note. Maybe I'll invite you to kind of expand on that if you have additional thoughts, and then we'll do Yvette, Kelly, Tess.
Thanks, Shauna. I appreciate the question. I think it's a really interesting one. As I was saying before, we've had about 600 folks who have journeyed to space and come home, and only 71 of those have been women. Right, we're still less than 12% of all of the space explorers throughout history, and it's slowly changing. When I look around Blue Origin, our new grad hires, the students coming fresh out of university, are about 50-50 underrepresented STEM professionals, and in our internship pool, that's even higher. It's about 2/3 of our students are coming in with those backgrounds. So I think that there is a wave coming, but it's not enough just to have a seat at the table. And I think that that's, for me, what's got to come next. It's about being able to bring your whole authentic self to that experience, and to bring everything that this group has shared in terms of what makes us us. And I think that that's why it's not just about diversity. We have to talk about equity and inclusion and intersectionality and all these other things that allow us to really welcome everyone into our community and be the best that we can possibly be.
I'd have to echo, obviously, what Erica said. You know, when I was building programs in the humanitarian sector, you know, international development, there was always this gender equity, gender mainstreaming, and it was a very, you know, cool term. Like, we have to gender mainstream all our programs, and every single program was only focused on women. And it took years, and it's still taking time, to understand that you needed to include young boys, teenage boys, and men in that equation, because stigmatization of roles, of gender roles, really come from every aspect of a community. It's not just the women that need to be empowered. They will be empowered. They probably sometimes had enough number in some of these communities to want to drive forward and to progress, and they were actually demanding these programs. But we found that that environment and context around the need for integration and equity was really that we had forgotten, you know, fundamentally for decades, that, oh yeah, we should probably also teach that across the board. You know, everyone should be understanding the same information at the same time to open up doors. I hope, you know, young women and young girls are seeing, and young men and young boys, because I have to say, there are so many men that we work with and we interact with here on this panel that do support us, that do advocate for us, that go the extra mile for us. And it means so much, because the door that we open and we leave open behind us also has to be left open behind them and open behind them. So I'm hoping that this creates like that lack of intimidation, taking it away, stripping down our stigmas, and really saying, everybody's welcome, and we all, as humans on this planet, have something to offer. So.
Perfect. Kelly, anything to add?
Yeah, it's always an interesting topic, and I can't say that I have fully fleshed out even all of my own thoughts on it, right? It's like a lifelong reflection. I grew up in Jupiter, Florida, super on brand. But I literally saw space shuttles launch from my bedroom window. Like my entire adolescent backdrop was as space age as you can get, like front row seat to the final frontier. And it just, I don't know if it was like a lack of imagination, but it never, I thought it was very cool, but it never occurred to me that I could be a part of that. It was just like a cool byproduct of being alive in the 21st century, that these extraordinary people got to go do these things. I don't know the extent to what that relates to, gender with me, or sort of, but I do remember from my AP psychology class that gender schemas are formed very early in life. And so I think about that with my own daughter. And I think about the fact that it did take someone. Like cream doesn't always rise to the top on its own. It needs to be pulled sometimes. And I had those folks in my life who acted as mentors and sponsors, including at the Explorers Club. This was like, an organization where I started out working coat check and volunteering my time, wanting to be around these extraordinary people I was invested in. I was given opportunities, bets were made on me, and I did my best to sort of make sure that investment paid off and, contributed back. And that's sort of the same story for me in the space industry that I aim to sort of pay forward to the next generation, which has been a huge motivator. And then I would just say, on a really personal reflection, just because Erica put it so beautifully, like with her children and what it's like to sort of see the disruption of, those stereotypes in real time. It's like, same thing with my daughter. It's like, I think that was the most emotional and exciting part of, getting to tell her that I was going to become an astronaut, was sort of seeing that reflected in what it means for her to watch her mommy become an astronaut. And, thinking like Erica said, less than 100 women in history have ever been to space, a handful of moms. But to my little 3-year-old, she's like, that's just another thing moms do. Like they go to work, they go to space, they go to the grocery store, like they do drop off, pick up, they do it all. Right. And so she's just going to grow up kind of knowing fundamentally that not even the sky is the limit. And I think that's really cool. And the very last thing I would point out is I always take a very optimistic, like glass half full and continuing to be poured view. And I think one of the things that's so rewarding to me is when I went to Sir Richard Branson's flight, Unity 22 in July, I had my mom and my daughter there. So there are 3 generations of women in my family. And it was just reflecting, and I made this joke on the live stream, but my mom will kill me for aging her. But when she was born, human beings hadn't yet been to space. And, when she was growing up, women in the United States were not eligible to become an astronaut yet. And then 1 generation later, she's watching her daughter prepare for a space flight of her own. And she's watching me meet the spacecraft that's going to, take me to space with my daughter. And so it was this moment, and it was just like how much change can happen in a single generation. And so I find that incredibly motivating. So it's a dense, gnarly topic, and one that is deserving of like so much reflection, attention, and investment. But those are my sort of thoughts.
Beautiful. And just before we take it over to Tess, it's I once heard someone say that there's 20-year-olds alive today that have never known a world without a continuously off-world crewed space station. To them, it's just normal that we have a space station that has people on it. And I really look forward into ushering in this future where kids, your kids, Erica's kids, to them, it's normal. To them, it's unthinkable that we never had that easy access to space. That's the future I look forward to. We're well on our way, but there's still work to be done. Tess, I would love to hear your thoughts on gender equity, what we've achieved, where we need to go in the space world.
Well, as usual, it's hard to follow on the heels of the things that have been said by the other incredible people on this panel. But I think, Shauna, you touched on it. Kelly, you touched on this. We grew up in environments where women were breaking barriers, right? We saw women in the field of space exploration, and it never even occurred to us that we couldn't, right? Shauna, you saw Roberta, I saw Sally, and it never even crossed my mind that I wouldn't be able to do it. And like Kelly, I was sort of glass half full, like the plot twists were thrown my way, but I always knew what I wanted to do, and I just kept pushing towards it. And I think that a lot of that comes back to the environment that we're in, right? Where my parents never questioned that that's what I wanted to do with my life. And they never said, I don't know, are you sure you think you could be an engineer? They just said, that's great. Like, we'll send you to space camp. We're going to call up the Challenger Center and we're going to, borrow a spacesuit and we're going to drag you over there and you're going to talk to an astronaut, And so the environments that we grow up in are so key in building the environments that we live in when we grow up, right? And we are building this environment in which space is really for everyone, right? Like Sally said, you can't be what you can't see. And so the more of us from different backgrounds who have had crazy wild rides to ending up in the space business, we're not NASA astronauts, we're just people who are getting to do extraordinary things, and kids see that and it makes it feel possible to them. And so I think one of the best things that we can do is exactly the sort of thing that we're doing now, and be out there, make it obvious that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be part of space exploration. Like, space is for everyone. And I think that's really exciting.
So as a follow-up, thank you so much for that, Tess, for underscoring the importance of representation. And I hope we get more into that. I just wanted to add a follow-up question that comes from Frances French. This is specifically to Yvette in her presentation, talking about your community, your family background. How do you reach folks who may not think that STEM is for them, because these opportunities aren't obvious every single day?
Thank you so much, Frances. The one thing that I try to be part of, and I think some of you have mentioned that you mentor, you're part of outreach education. I'm very passionate about the outreach that we do at the Institute, and I'm a mentor. But I think there's been so many times that we inadvertently, we don't intend to, but through our excitement, we put out information and details about our experience that intimidate still. I say, oh, this is accessible, but then you see me in a microgravity flight and then they're like, oh, I can't do that. And I have young girls who still write and say, well, I can't do that. I saw what you do and I'm not smart in math and I don't want to do science. So how do I do that? The more that we can be open and the more that we can be accessible, I think that helps for younger students and marginalized students anywhere to know that we're real people, right? I know, for example, I've been really impressed with, I know Shauna and Kelly very well, and I see how accessible they are, and they want people to know I'm a person, I can answer you, I have the same, human fallacy that everyone has, and I did it. And I did it because I had the grit inside me to do it. I do help when students write and they say, I'm from a reservation. There's no one on my res who can do this. How do I get started? The first thing I do is connect them to information. I connect them to people. I connect them to programs. And I stay alongside with them as an accomplice to make sure that they get access. And that's the number one thing that, above being in a program and then spending your time mentoring, is that you offer as a catalyst actual tangible things that they actually can be part of. So that's one thing I think that I've learned along the journey is just don't keep it to yourself. Share what you know and who you know. You never know what might change somebody's life. Hope that answered the question.
That was beautiful. I think we can also get into a side discussion on the grit, the challenges that we faced or didn't even think of as challenges, just thought, hey, I want to do this. And, no one's going to stop me because, I think the power of a strong-willed little girl, I think the moms here amongst us can definitely attest to, are something to, be proud of and encourage our girls to be fierce. There's
Shauna, I want to foot stomp one thing in terms of the connecting people.
Absolutely.
There are some awesome communities coming online over the last few years, especially for students that are college age and above. The Brooke Owens Fellowship, the Patty Grace Smith Fellowship, the Zed Fellows, the Matt Isakowitz Fellows. And these are communities that are not just elevating women and people of color and folks that come from challenging backgrounds, but giving them networks and jobs and ways of belonging in the community in a really incredible fashion. So check those out if you have students in your worlds.
And on that note, actually,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I also wanted to tag on to what Yvette said about it appearing intimidating. I think when you're given 10 minutes, for example, you don't go into all the times where you totally screwed up, right? behind all of these cool experiences we have that we share with you are a bunch of times where it didn't work and we cried in a basement, example, because our PhDs were going horrible or whatever. And but it humanizes the story to share some of those and to make it clear that it's not all just that we decided we were going to do it and then we had grit and we did it and it was awesome, but we screw up. We just maybe assume that you don't want to hear about all those times. So, humanizing the journey as well, I think helps.
Absolutely. And I think we also need to speak to the power of building the network. And I actually want to share a really neat interaction that's going on in the comments right now. So a few of us know Sarah Jane Pell, Australian fellow IIAS bioastronautics researcher, amazing aquanautics artist. And there's another Australian who says, how would you suggest someone living in Australia get involved with IIAS or other space orgs? You heard of a few cool ones from Erica and Tess just now. And it is organized this back and forth that's going on in the chat right now. Sarah Jane is saying to Jack from Australia, I'm part of this. I trained with PoSSUM and IIAS. Our borders are closed, but there's so many online opportunities. So yeah, if you want to be part of the space world, there's so many, there's space for all of us, just get started. And maybe your first step is this panel today. So I'm really loving seeing that camaraderie. I want to get to a few more questions here. So this comes from Axel Tricot from Bremen. Hi to Bremen. Amazing panel, so many different paths leading to so many different places. How do you manage to define your goals and deal with how they evolve along the way without getting lost? So this time we'll start with Kelly, Tess, Erica, and then Yvette.
Oh, gosh, the mute button is my nemesis on Zoom. Staying focused, gosh, my path has been a really winding one, and I've allowed myself, a lot of grace in figuring it out. And so focus for me is a really interesting kind of lens to look at it through, because I would definitely say that whatever is in front of me in the moment in a near-term goal, I am like absolutely focused on and really driven. But I've taken a lot of turns. I have a film degree. That was something where I thought I was going to work for Nat Geo or do science communication. Instead, decided wanted to be doing the science. And so I've taken a lot of turns, and I've one other thing is I ended up leaving the space industry professionally after a few years, after working with an incredible, rocket company, after working with a government agency. I felt a calling after working on problems that were, multiple generations out about advancing humanity's footprint, in the solar system. I felt called to work on problems that threaten that future and affect my own generation and my daughter's generation, whether it's in the realm of national security or other stability and prosperity issues. And so I've allowed myself this sort of, freedom to explore all of the multitudes that we've talked about. And I've still had my North Star on space as a goal, and I've stayed involved. I, remained IIAS was, that I will talk about that until the day I die. That's the organization that's enabling me to go to space. I mean, it's a dream. But I think the focus has been really something that's driven by just mission drive and like an intent to make a difference. And so the space flight for me, it's like, I approach the goal with not just like, I want to go to space individually, me, Kelly, how can I do that? Like check the box. Now it's like, I'll consider it a failure if I'm the only one from our organization who goes. Like that cannot be. That's not a legacy. That's an experience. Like the legacy is helping open up the entirety of a new pipeline for researchers, for payloads, for experiments, for science, for civilians. And so I think like that drive is sort of what fuels me in every direction. And so that's something that's always been, the focus changes, the lens changes, the aperture changes, it's all in flux. But at the end of the day, that is sort of my core motivation. And I've like that needle has been threaded throughout the entirety of my career in whatever forms that it's taken.
That's awesome. And I know you're just getting started, and I'm so glad that you alluded to, you could have easily just done this as a one-off flight. But I'm such a huge fan of the notion of you can absolutely be the first. There's always going to be a first, but make sure you're not the last. And, that I think is what's so incredible about what you're doing is you're trying to open up that access frontier. So thank you for what you're doing, Kelly. So Tess, I wanted to know if you had anything to add to Axel's comment. Do you have any questions on defining your goals, dealing with evolving along the way? You definitely alluded to that. I will buy you a drink next time I see you in person. I want to hear your story, but chime in. I would love to hear from you.
Yeah. Well, first, I would like to make a motivational poster of what you just said. Of you can absolutely be the first, but make sure you're not the last. That's lovely. I hope that I never forget that because it was beautiful. In terms of dealing with failure, we have this saying in flight operations at NASA, failure impact workaround. And we use it in the context of something just broke on the space station. You're working in the control center. What broke? How does it affect the space station as a whole? What are you going to do to fix it? And when I learned about it at NASA, I realized it's kind of the way that I approach my whole life. Something didn't go to plan. Okay, it's no use crying over spilt milk. How am I going to deal with it? How does it affect my plan? How am I going to change my plan if I need to? Do I need to change my plan? Sometimes you don't. And so just what I found is be forward looking. Don't get caught up in the things that aren't going well, because you control your outlook, even if something is not going perfectly well. And so to that end, be forward looking, but be present in what you're working on at any given moment. I think it's really easy to get so tied up in the future and this has to go well or I'll never be able to do X, Y, Z. But if you get sucked into that thinking, sometimes it becomes a lot harder to deal with the challenges of the day to day. So I think trying to just maintain a level head about, what is happening and what you can do to overcome it. And even if that solution is I'm going to go home and I'm going to eat a quart of ice cream and then I'm going to decide tomorrow, that is a totally valid solution sometimes if that's what you need to help get you in the right headspace to tackle the problem the next day.
Absolutely. And a book called The NASA Outlook to Solving Life's Problems is a book that I would absolutely read. So if you write it, I will buy it. And actually over to Erica, another way I've heard you frame this problem or this question when you and I have been on a panel together, rather than saying, how did it break? You've asked, what have you broken lately? So Erica, would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite interview questions that we ever had. Is what's the last thing that you broke, right? And what's the last thing that you fixed? It tells you so much more about what people are doing than what's the last problem set that you solved on your homework. But I think there's something a common thread here, which is that we often ask people to tell us about their life history. And they tell us about a straight line. And Tess, I love your graphic that sort of bounced back and forth very visually, because I think lives are only straight lines in hindsight. Never when you're playing the tape forward. And we tend to find that this little center that grows, and we get really good at something, and then we get good at the things on the fringes, and then we sort of move out to one of those fringes, and we do that again, and then we move out again, and we keep sort of making those edges our new centers. I always thought that a career in STEM and space meant that I had to be doing math and engineering and problem sets. And I've got 3 degrees in engineering. I can do this stuff. But my passion and my path in life has shown me that my best STEM career is in business and in policy and in strategy. And those things I are informed every day by the science and the technology I understand. But I'm not the one that's actually doing the calculations anymore. And so that was a really interesting thing for me to understand, was that there's more than one way to be a space professional.
Absolutely. And I know, Yvette, you've often spoken about this, about, the importance of bringing art and, culture and, Indigenous representation into space. So Yvette, would love to hear, first of all, your answer to Axel's question, and then your additional thoughts. So go ahead.
Thank you, Axel. I know Axel, and thank you for being here. And in fact, I just changed my goals as this panel happened. I want to fly to space with these women. So you never know, you evolve every minute. I was fortunate, I guess I'm fortunate now, that my dad was in the Navy. So I moved around a lot from when I was born until I was about 12 when I got to El Paso. And moving every year or 2 years and bouncing around and making new friends, starting over and adapting quickly and plugging yourself in, and just like, I had a great attitude about life. I feel the same as like Erica, Tess, and Kelly talking about having like this, not a Pollyanna, but definitely a positive view on solution seeking. That's what I am as an adult. I mean, plot me in Afghanistan and I'm like, let me know what's happening and I will find my way through this. And it's the same with this industry, and it's the same with making career decisions, university and education decisions. Is what do I feel passionate about right now? What are my skills at this moment? How does that fit into the plan? and what is that fringed, tangential that Erica talked about that I can visit right now? Because this word multitudes came into my life only in the last year. I didn't understand what people would ask me, and I'm like, oh, what part of my life do I talk about? What goal am I trying to achieve yet? There was never anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with changing your direction. And I embrace that. And articulating it now is all those fringe passions that I have are part of what I am and who I am. And I love when I get to entertain something that shifts my goal. And I'm like, oh, well, 4 years ago, I was in Haiti and I was covering Francophone Africa. And my goal was to ensure that these revitalization programs helped this generation of children so that they had food and education. That was it. Today, it's completely different. And as long as you embrace that, I think those moments of shifting, as long as they make sense for who you are and that you're true to your skill set and you are expanding and growing, I think it's great to embrace it and go with what is happening in front of you.
That's wonderful. And there's so many supportive comments coming from the chat. Please keep them coming. Diane Fiedler says, please write the NASA problem solving guide. She will be the first to join the Kickstarter. So Tess, your first backer. Erica has said, second, I just got a thumbs up. Third from Yvette. I'm in for sure. So there you go. You're already partway there. I see a question from earlier on asking, Shauna, do you have your cave diving certification? It is on the bucket list. I do not currently, but I do have plans. I would love to. I see lots of questions or lots of comments saying they want to go with space with us all. So Yvette, maybe we should make that our new goal. I would definitely go to space with all of you. A few more questions. I know our time's getting short, but there's some insightful ones here. The Kyle Foster that you have heard, alluded to, and seen snuck into at least 3 of our slide decks, asked, how do the panelists view the challenges facing the women in the space industry? Are they evolving? Are they the same as previously? So this time we will go Erica, Yvette, Tess, Kelly.
I don't think that the challenges facing women in the space industry are unique. I think that they are of a culture and of a time and of a place that we're all living through. I think that the space industry has an incredible connectivity within it. One of the things I keep finding is just how small this space world really is. And the number of women that have mentored me through my journey and helped give me a step up and that have been connecting me to the resources are so incredible. I love these kinds of events that we see where we all get to come together and play a little bit, because I want to fly with all of you, right? I think that this is an incredible time and place. And so the question for me is really, how do we keep making it better? Because it's certainly not perfect, right? So how do we keep pushing that frontier and making sure that every day that we are, leaning into that Star Trek Gene Roddenberry, infinite diversity through infinite combinations, right? How do we start to envision a world that looks very, very different from the ones that our parents and grandparents envisioned?
I agree completely with Erica. And I also think the more that it's the more that we see each other visibly, and the more diverse our conversations are about our place in it, I think we welcome open conversations in the workplace about what it is to interact with each other, what women are accomplishing now. Trust me, I don't remember being, for me, that spark of like seeing a woman in space was when the Challenger was going to go up. And my 3rd grade teacher And, me as an 8-year-old, we were just obsessed until that launch was going to happen, because she was a teacher and this is a teacher and this is in my life. So we can go up, that kind of correlation of women in around you in different professions being able to be the same. So I also believe that there's room for more conversation for young women, inviting more young people into the conversations. And yes, it's great to have us, and we're experienced, and we're up here with our stories. And it's also, what does the next generation offer us? Because I learned phenomenally from those conversations. I think we've been with the young students, and it blows my mind that a 13-year-old can put a better experiment together than I can. So I'm looking forward to seeing more young women come in and opening up the conversation to them.
Perfect. Tess, over to you.
Oh man, I was just reflecting on what we were saying earlier about that it's about all aspects of diversity and equity and inclusivity, right? We're not just women, we're all kinds of women from all kinds of places. And so I think that the conversation is shifting from women in space to all women in space. And I'm loving hearing all of your perspectives on it. So I'm going to just pass that right over to Kelly now.
This mute button, I'm going to get it soon. Yeah, no, I will take the hot potato. I think, it's, again, like full transparency, it's like one of these things you think about all the time, right? Like I just don't have fully developed and digested thoughts on the worldview. I think it's like my experience has been so incredibly positive, and so I hold that in one perspective. On the other hand, I have heard from women who have very different experiences than I have. I agree though wholeheartedly with Erica that I don't believe this is unique to the space industry. I believe this is, more a societal reflection than, an industry or vertical specific reflection. And so I think like one of the things that I have aimed to do is do my best to help break barriers down. And some of those are self-imposed barriers, because those are the ones that I faced the most. It was like applying my own ceiling. It wasn't in my life someone telling me you can't do this. It was me not even thinking that I could do it. And so, we would joke a lot, like 9 out of 10 articles that talked about my upcoming space flight called me TikTok star Kelly Girardi, which is what my mom was texting me like, you should ask them to change it. I'm like, I don't care. It's fine. But I think like, joking aside, like that is one way that I try to use a science communication platform. It's not always communicating the science. Sometimes it's just being visible and having a platform and sort of bringing other people around along for the ride rather, and showing sort of the mundane as well. To Yvette's point from earlier, it's just, we're all individual people. We have multitudes. This is becoming accessible. And I think, the most unique, incredible thing about me is that I'm just an average person who has this incredible opportunity to go do science in space, right? And that's always been the case for astronauts. Like the biggest limiting factor, through the entirety of the time that humans have been in space to becoming an astronaut was always access. It was never aptitude. Every single person on this call, all of the people in the comments who are sharing, it's like, we saw with Inspiration 4, right? Like access is increasing. It's proving that anyone can become an astronaut if you're given the opportunity to train and fly. And so that's what we're changing here. It's like even NASA astronauts were once civilians before government sponsored training. And so it's like breaking down those sort of conceptual blocks. That is sort of like my personal pet project and goal with my platforms is just really making it crystal clear that anyone can be part of this and create an impact and sort of seek these opportunities.
That's another pearl that I want to see on a t-shirt. It was never about aptitude. It was about access. That is so incredibly powerful. We're seeing some more amazing comments. I see from Barbara Griffith. What other countries have space programs regarding women's participation? Do we interact from women's space exploration professionals in other countries? I know we're down to 30 seconds. We don't have time to answer that. But I do see another comment in the chat showing the power of women just reaching out. Our colleague Ana Pires from Portugal is saying, I'm so passionate about being part of IIAS as well as Space for All Nations because of this, making space accessible for all. So, it really is. This really is our time. So in the closing minute we have here, we're going to do a rapid fire. I just want to hear an answer to one question that cropped up earlier. What fun item will you take with you to space, as well as where can people find you online? Kelly, Yvette, Erica, Tess, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your brains, your experience with us. So I'm going to let you all go ahead, tell us what fun item. Tess, will make you go first this time, and then Kelly, Yvette, Erica.
Well, it's hard to decide, but I think in the theme of, we've talked about it a bunch of times today, that it's not just space for women, it's space for everyone. I'm probably going to bring a pride patch, because that's part of who I am, that adds to the diversity. And I think that's one element of diversity we haven't seen in space a lot yet. And I would love to float one in front of the window and take a picture and show the world that you can be part of the community too. So that's probably what I'd take. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm on Facebook, but I tend not to add people. So you might find me, but please don't be offended if I don't add you.
Perfect. And next up, we have Kelly. Go ahead.
Yeah, this question has actually caused me quite a bit of angst, thinking truly what am I going to put in this little payload bag? And the best that I've come up with so far are really personal sentimental things. I take comfort in knowing that I will be a space flown artifact when I come back. So that has taken the pressure off of me having to take personal mementos for myself. And now I'm trying to think of who will really benefit the most from having something like a tangible kind of item. So I'm thinking of my family and friends and small, lightweight, safe things that are not sharp edged, that I can either carry in my flight suit, like mission patches, bookmarks, photos, and little memorabilia.
Perfect. And Yvette, over to you.
I know I've often joked, but I'm kind of serious. I would take Shauna as my payload. So she's absolutely fun. She makes me laugh. She makes the difficult look easy. And in reality, yeah, you would be my payload, but I would definitely take mementos from my mother and honor something from my ancestors. So that's what I would take.
And I wholly appreciate that. And I did not plant that question, I promise. Yvette, where can people find you online?
I live on Instagram, and I do have a Twitter, and it's at GypsyNaut on both of them. As Tess too, I have Facebook. I don't use it. So Instagram and Twitter.
Beautiful. And Erica, take us home. What are you taking to space with you, and where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I had the good fortune of running a program at Blue where we got to fly things for all of our employees for a number of years. And it was fascinating to see all the things that people chose to bring. Personally, I flew a number of Lego minifigs. That was one of my favorite things to share with kids of all ages. And then they could have this thing that was very familiar and somehow otherworldly at the same time. So I think I might stick with that theme. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter at adastra2 and Facebook, but same thing. It tends to be a little bit more personal.
Thank you so much. So that brings us to time. I know we could go all night, but there you have it. 4 incredible women, 4 very different paths, 4 stellar journeys. Dr. Tess Caswell, Kelly Girardi, Yvette Gonzalez, Dr. Erica Wagner. Thank you so much for your time and your brains tonight. We look forward to hearing more from you in the future. I am Dr. Shawna Pandya. You can also find me on the aforementioned platforms, and we hope to connect with you further in the virtual world. Have a wonderful night.